we have some really exciting guests this fall and through the winter and into the spring. And today, I really feel blessed and very excited about our guest today, best-selling author James Russell Lingerfelt. And, you know, it's said that James Russell Lingerfelt is where Nicholas Sparks and C.S. Lewis intersect. According to Lee Wilson, best-selling author of The Real Heaven and The Last Hybrid. And another quote, Lingerfelt has accomplished in 2 years what most writers dream of accomplishing in 10. A quote from M.J. Rose, Writer's Digest. You know, I'm very excited today to have James with us. And, James, are you there? Can you?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, I'm here. I hope you guys don't mind my southern accent. Okay.
Oh, I love it.
I'll say yes, ma'am, a lot. Is it okay?
Absolutely. And,
okay.
You know, my husband and I lived down in New Orleans for 3 years. And what I love so much is just how honoring the young people are. And still, you know, they still refer to their elders and their parents and, you know, as ma'am, sir. Mm-hmm. And we enjoyed our time down there and the culture and the people there. So it's fun to hear your voice and I am very familiar with that southern voice and miss it living here in the West Coast now. But anyway, welcome. I'm glad you're with us today. And, you know, we're going to talk about the mason jar and the topics that are covered in the book that include how to navigate through healing after broken romantic relationships, how to overcome grief when a loved one passes away, a beautiful love story set in their home state, the character's home state, which entertains and helps them relate and feel like characters in the story. Or maybe I misquoted that a little bit. The importance of relying on loved ones and finding a new life purpose after loved ones pass away or leave, and how to behave when encountering their first love years later. And these are all elements that are, you know, that the book talks about and covers. And so I'm really excited today. We may not be able to talk about each of those, and we really want to focus on the opportunity to talk with James today and interview him. But before I officially introduce Mr. Lingerfelt, let's take a quick break for a word from today's sponsor. All right, well, welcome back, James. And I want to introduce you. Let's take a moment. Again, with us today is best-selling author James Russell Lingerfelt, and serves on the board of directors for Life Bread and taught 2 years as a visiting professor in ancient Judaic studies at Lipscomb University. In May of 2010, after returning from overseas, he resigned from teaching and his PhD program to pursue a career in writing and film production. He spent 5 years writing his first novel, The Mason Jar, an inspirational epic romance. He self-published and released it in December 2011 after being rejected by 8 literary agents. Through word of mouth, The Mason Jar sold over 10,000 copies during the first 2 years. HarperCollins offered Lingerfelt $40,000 plus 20% royalties for The Mason Jar and a sequel novel, but James refused since he couldn't keep the film rights. Best-selling romance author Diana Bold said she was blown away by The Mason Jar. Award-winning children's book author Nicole Weaver stated in a review, Lingerfelt's book reads like one long, beautiful poem. And author Lee Wilson called Lingerfelt the intersection of Nicholas Sparks and C.S. Lewis, as I mentioned earlier. And in 2012, Mr. Lingerfelt finished an internship in producing at the Emmy award-winning production company Revolution Pictures in Nashville. Lingerfelt then wrote the screenplay for The Mason Jar after reading over a dozen screenwriting books recommended by Hollywood executives. In December 2013, Lingerfelt was flown to Beverly Hills for table talks concerning the feature film. And Lingerfelt's first novel, The Mason Jar, a coming-of-age love story, was written to help readers find healing after broken and severed relationships. It's the Mason Jar feature film is scheduled for pre-production next year, 2015, and will be directed in the same dramatic and romantic tones as The Notebook and Pride and Prejudice. Wow. I've read your, and of course there's a lot more to your bio, and there's a link on an email that I sent out to our followers that I hope you'll go to, and it's his website to learn more about Mr. Lingerfelt in the book, and he also has a blog. You can go to jamesrussell.org. It's amazing. I've interviewed a number of authors, and you have a fascinating background. And I really, there's so many questions I have, but I'd like to start out, if you could tell us a bit about your background leading up to your work as a writer.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. We're really excited about the feature film. The only thing, some of the conflict we're having trouble with is whether or not it's more of a lot of the professionals look at it and they say, well, this is more of a Hallmark type film. And, if that's what it ends up being, it is what it is. But I know that being influenced, there are just so many beautiful romantic stories out there. And the people that encounter it really kind of put it on with that same kind of feel as The Notebook and Pride and Prejudice. And all of us were just huge fans of both of those films. So we're trying to make sure that it goes along with that same style. But I tell you, when you get an entire film crew onto something, you got different directors, other writers are contributing. It's fun, but I have no idea how this is going to turn out. So we'll see.
I wanted to encourage you because you have an incredible story, and I definitely sense the elements of, a romantic film, and like The Notebook. So, good things require sometimes a lot of work and perseverance, as you know, because your background, I'm preaching to the choir here because your background is amazing. So I'd love to see it come to fruition, and we hope to be able to walk through that process a little bit and hear, just look forward to that. But share with us a bit about what inspired you to write the story, The Mason Jar.
Well, my entire life, I've had a pen and piece of paper in my hand. When I look back on my life in middle school and high school, that writing in the journal was a way for me to reflect and think on what was going on. My dad was the youngest of 8 siblings, so I grew up at the feet of aunts and uncles who were old enough to be my grandparents, and most of them were. And they all, it was a small town in Alabama, and they all stayed there. No one ever moved away. So I kind of grew up in this environment where I had a lot of what I like to call the elders raising me and coaching me and teaching me. And one of the things that they would always tell me is how their memory was slipping, and they wished that they had written down stories from their life when they were kids because they'd forgotten them. And so I would write these, when really neat little things happened in my life, I would write about them, or when I was having, it was also my release, everybody goes through struggles, especially when they're adolescents. And so I was writing that down, and I was introduced to writers like Thoreau and Emerson and Longfellow, Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters, and Virginia Woolf and some of them. So it was I've never really been my side of the brain isn't a math person like a lot of people in my family. It's the artsy, creative side. And so that was my way to express myself, was through writing. And I remember being an 8th grader, and we turned in an assignment. And my English teacher tells me this. She still laughs about it. She said that we had turned in a paper, and she took me outside, and I thought I was in trouble. And I said, Miss Moore, I wrote it. I promise I wrote it. And I don't remember this story. This is what she tells me. And she laughed, and she said, I know you wrote it, Russell. I just wanted you to know how impressed I was with it. And she said, I can't believe an eighth grader would write some of the stuff that you had written. And it was just these, if I remember right, it was just, I think I had the ability to empathize with people that I didn't have any relationships with. Compassion. A lot of times when we're young, it's hard to be compassionate toward people when we don't get it or when we haven't experienced some of the same things. But all my life, I think I'm a compassionate person, but I've always had this just heart for people. So I went and I did a lot of humanitarian work when I was in college, did it for 10 summers straight, got really into the feature of humanitarian work, which I think is microlending, and that's a very long story. I don't have too much time to get into it, but if you have a heart for people, especially third world communities, and you want to see what the future of humanitarian work is, you need to check out microlending. One of the leading organizations for that is a group called Kiva, K-I-V-A. I think they're in the northwest of the states. I'm not sure. But I had a heart for that. I'm actually a seminary dropout. I got my master's degree at Pepperdine in Malibu, and then I was in a great PhD program at Fuller Seminary in Pasadena. But when I started teaching as a professor in Nashville, unfortunately, it wasn't anything like I thought it would be. And my personal interest was in the humanitarian side of ministry. And unfortunately, though, if you're going to teach that, they want you to have a good 5 to 7 years of full-time experience in another country on the ground. And when I started thinking about that, and they also wanted you to have mastered 2 foreign languages in addition to English, and then after all of that, you're very fortunate if you can get a job. If you're a middle white class man, trying to get a job as a professor is very difficult. And you're also very fortunate if you start off making $35,000 a year. And so I just started thinking about it long term, and I thought, I don't think this is what I want to do. What I really want to do is I want to write and I want to create things. And when I was 19 years old, as an adventure, me and a couple of friends went and got on a television show called Dawson's Creek, which was really popular back in, between 1998 and 2003. Between 1998 and 2003, it was huge. And so we went and we got on the show as extras. And then I went and worked on Tim Burton's Big Fish, and I remember just falling in love with being on film sets. And I had some mutual friends that owned the company Revolution Pictures in Nashville, and found out that they did internships. Even if you didn't study film in college, you could still do an internship. And so I dropped out of the PhD program. I resigned from my job as a visiting professor, and I took the film internship and just started writing. And it was 2 years of growth pains. I started reading some business books on entrepreneurship, and they said, give it 2 years. If you want to do something, give it 2 years. And if you don't have a client or if you haven't made any money, you might want to look at doing something else. And so I'd saved up a lot of money, and then I just started living on my savings, did the internship for free, which was a requirement. And about at 1 year and 11 months, I got a job on the production team of a film and made enough money that it would pay my salary for 3 months. So I made enough money in half a month on that film set. I made enough money to last me 3 months. So which is, that's good money, And so, But it was right there at 1 year and 11 months. And I thought, I'm just going to, if I fall flat on my face, which is possible, I can always go back to teaching. But it's worked out, Some days are better than others, but long-term wise, it was a very good decision, I think. So, and here I am speaking to you, and I have no idea how many people are listening. So,
well, we don't have a lot of live listeners, but we have had probably over 40,000 listens in the last 12 months, and and I'm certainly going to share this, and we'll post it on social media to encourage people to, they typically download it and listen at their own convenience. Mm-hmm. But I'm just fascinated with your background, and although you didn't pursue the PhD route or becoming a professor, I guess is, mm-hmm. and you have squeezed in I mean, reading your bio, it really is amazing, James, and you have squeezed in, I think, more life in the years that you've been here than probably 1,000 other people, or 100 other people, certainly, and kind of living the grind. I mean, you have a lot of ambition, and it's very inspiring. And I want to go back to your involvement. Well, I want to talk about the book a little bit more first.
Sure.
The character in your book, Finn, or Clayton Finnanakin, is it?
Finn Cannon.
Finn Cannon?
Yeah, that's right. Finn Cannon.
Yeah,
Finn
who was
Cannon,
a Tennessee
Clayton
farm
Finn
boy
Cannon.
raised at, Finn Cannon, raised at the feet of his grandfather. One can't help notice the similarities between your life and the main character. You also come from a rural background, raised on a cattle ranch in North Alabama, in a town of 750. Can you share a little bit about the process of writing the novel, but really writing in general, and your own story, or how much of your own life and experience influenced that, the mason jar is your writing in general?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, certainly. I tell you, this is something that someone told me some time ago. I pick up on all these cool little quotes, because I read all the time. But they said that if you want to get to know an author's heart, read his fiction. Don't read his nonfiction. Read his fiction or her fiction. That's because the only way we can create anything is if we own it first. So everything that we create is going to come from us, whether it's our past experiences, the movies we've seen, the books we've read, everything. So am I Clayton Finn Cannon? I'm not, but is his heart and soul similar to mine? Yes, it is. And in order to write, I don't want to write a story that I can't be passionate about. I don't want to write something that I don't enjoy writing about. The story is filled with elements of the guy pursuing the girl and coming up against roadblocks. Well, what happens when you do get the girl, but if she's a person of freedom of choice and she decides to do these other things and it's your first time to fall in love, well, how do you respond to that? And then what happens when, you have these loving relationships in your life, and then life drama and life trauma happens at the same time, and then loved ones back home want you to come back home because they miss you, and loved ones back home start dying. How do you handle life? And I think one of the things that I've noticed in speaking, and I guess it's no surprise to say that most of my readers are women, and one of the things that I've found in communicating with women from all over the world, and it doesn't matter what country they're from or how old they are, and I think this is with guys as well, they're just not open to talking about it, is that everybody, no matter how bitter they are or angry or disappointed in how life has unfolded, everybody still dreams of having love. If they're single, they dream of falling in love again, no matter what happened in the past. No matter what kind of abusive relationship they came out with, they have this hope that there's someone out there for them that will be a good fit for them, that will love them and cherish them and be dedicated to them. Being in love in a healthy way, being in love with the idea of finding love again. That's a very common thread in just about every single conversation that I've had with readers. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, love is a very powerful motivator, and it's love never fails. And I know in the information on your book, it states that your book, The Mason Jar, is written for the bruised and the broken. And talk about that a little bit and how you see the book relating to people that, you've mentioned some elements of that, but what do you think is kind of that the force in the story that can really help to bring healing?
Well, I think everybody's been hurt. If they haven't been hurt, they're going to be hurt. And so I think that no matter, going into the other countries, what I learned quick was we're pretty much the same. We all want peace. We all want security, and we all want love. We have different ideas about how to go about getting that. Some of those ideas about how to get those things are very unfortunate, in some countries. But those are very common threads. And so this is a very universal theme, is that when life does not work out the way you wanted it to, and when your hopes and dreams don't find fulfillment as often as you hope that they would, and you fall flat on your face after sacrificing your entire self for someone, what do you do then? When it all comes crashing down, what's next? Because a lot of people, they don't get through that. I've talked to a lot of people who, considered suicide during times. It wasn't a chemical imbalance. They were not born, with tendencies toward clinical depression. It was situational depression. And a lot of them, it was like, okay, these terrible things have happened. Well, what now? Well, it's not going to get, it's their first time. When we get cut, the first cut's the deepest. It hurts the most. And when we're wounded for the first time, since it's our first time, we don't know what it's like when we find healing. Like, when you and I get cut, when we got cut for the first time, we watched the wound, and eventually it started healing. It scabbed over. It was still painful, but it eventually scabbed over. And then it turned into a scar, and it still hurt, but after a while the pain went away, and then eventually you start seeing after a number of years the scar starts disappearing as well. But if you've never been cut, you don't know that. And so what I've realized in talking to a lot of people is that the mason jar really hit home with people who are going through that stuff right now. Like people who were at rock bottom and didn't have any guidance, didn't have anyone to talk to about it, didn't have anyone speaking the right words into their lives. The mason jar resonated more with them than anybody else. Now, and I'll say this, there are a lot of people who hate that book. And that was one of the things that took me by surprise as a writer. And people say, well, not everybody's going to like your book. And I said, okay, I agree, not everybody's going to like the book. I had no idea people were going to hate it. And so I've gotten probably 25% of the letters and reviews that I've gotten on the internet have been just vicious, and that really surprised me. And one of the things I've been dwelling on a lot lately and thinking about it is how that the way we react to things is evident as to where we are in our journey right now. That was really surprising. It was not that people didn't like it, but that people were vicious about it.
To talk about why you think that is, what is it in the story and the mason jar that you think is so riveting that it would cause an emotion like that in response from 25% or how many of what's happening with people?
I shouldn't say people because we're not talking about all people, but let's a few people are scandalized by the idea of unconditional love. Now, they'll say, oh, yes, I have people in my life that I love unconditionally. Oh, you do? So you're telling me that despite any condition, despite any circumstance, despite what's going on, you would constantly put their desires and needs above your own.
And that angers people that they would think that is a reality or a truth because they're not capable of it, or they haven't.
Well, in my experience with them, it's they say that they are people of unconditional love, but I don't think they really understand how that's manifested. Because if you are a person of unconditional love towards another person, that person can say and do anything. And at the end of the day, you're still going to be, the old Judaic story of the prodigal son. He basically, in the ancient Judaic culture, he slapped every single person in the face in his family when he ran off, and spent the family's fortune. He just basically did everything that we in the Western culture and even Eastern cultures would look down on. Like he was an insult to the family. He shamed the family in their culture. But the father was still watching for him to come back. The father couldn't chase after him. The son had to wake up to himself to see what he was doing. This wasn't a good life to live. But the father welcomed him back. Faith-based films are really, taking off amongst certain communities right now. And one of my best friends is a marriage and family counseling professor at Lipscomb University in Nashville. And he told me that they showed one of those films. I'm trying to remember which one it was. Maybe it was, I don't think it was Fireproof, but it was one of those films where it really touched on the concept of unconditional love. And there were men and women in their 50s and 60s I just remember him saying that one of the parents said, no, you have to draw the line somewhere. And I understand you can't just let people do anything that they want because they could end up hurting themselves and they could end up hurting other people along the way. But when we start thinking about how am I in relation to unconditional love, we're thinking about me as an individual. We have to examine ourselves. They were vicious toward the idea of continually loving someone no matter what they say or do. I mean, this is not an easy, we throw around these terms, oh, yes, I'm a person of unconditional love. But when we see it in real life, it's almost as if it took us by surprise. Like, oh, I didn't mean that. I didn't really mean every single circumstance and every single situation, you know. And one of the things that the grandfathers in my life told, one of the things that the grandfathers in my life told me growing up is that when you come to that place of just inner peace, no matter what happens around you, and you have this inner peace and you're going to continue loving people, that's when you're reaching maturity.